Hi, friends. It's your girl, Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guild titled Stop Dating Your Dad. And I will admit, this episode title is quite clickbaity. And it's supposed to be because I wanted to get you in here. I wanted you to click this episode, turn it on, and listen to it. And if you're listening to me speak right now, it worked. And I'm not mad about that. I'm not upset. I don't regret it. This episode, I want to talk about how our dating patterns and the partners that we attract can be heavily influenced by the relationship that we have with our father as women, as brown women. And I want to preface all of this by saying that this episode is not to blame anybody. It's not to be negative or harsh. And though I am deploying a little bit of criticality, it's not to be critical of ourselves, of each other, or our fathers, really, because, I just got to say, I love my dad a lot. I love him so much. He is one of the most important people to me in my life, and vice versa. I know he really loves me. He really cares about me, and I am probably his favorite person in the world. I can confirm that, and I'm sure he will too. So this episode is not to be negative, and if that's kind of what you're looking for, this episode might not be it. But I will challenge all of us to get a little bit deeper in our exploration with our relationship with our fathers, because I think it's an important place for us to explore, to excavate. And I'm 27, and some might listen to this and think, wow, you're doing this work really early. And some might listen to this episode and think, okay, like it's about time. And for me, I would say it's a combination of both, because I don't know, as a brown girl, I think I've focused a lot on my relationship with my mom, and I've focused a lot on, the continuity of my lineage through my mother. And I find that it's very recent that I started to wake up to the way that my relationship with my father manifests in my life in multiple ways. And it's been quite a revealing process. I actually find that the work that I did in therapy or through various healing modalities on my relationship with my mom came to me a lot easier. And all of this work that I'm doing with my dad, with my father, is actually coming to me a lot more in a more nuanced way. And so it is a bit harder to navigate. So yeah. I guess where I want to start with the episode is I want to start with a story, and it goes back a couple years. It goes back, I think, to 2021. I can't remember, but it goes back. Essentially, my family and I were invited to go to a jago party, a pre-wedding party, and I was in my room. I was getting ready. I was putting on my makeup, putting on my lenga, and I got a knock on my bedroom drawer. I opened my bedroom drawer, and it was my dad, and he asked me like, "Oh, where's your mom? Where is she? We're getting late." I said, "Oh, she's at the salon. She's at the parlor. She's just probably getting her hair done or getting her makeup done." And he made a not so nice comment. And again, my father is great. He's lovely, but I don't know about y'all, but like sometimes Daisy dads can be quite rude and they can be quite dismissive. And he said something rude about my mom getting ready and wasting time. And it really bugged me. And I remember closing the door and I stood there silently and I said, "Dear God, please never let me have a husband like my father." And then I walked back into my bathroom and I had a moment. I just stopped and I thought, oh my God, but that's exactly what I've been wishing for. And for context, I grew up admiring my father a lot. He was my hero. I loved him. I spent a lot of time with him in my early years, and I had a really close knit relationship. It was like, like daddy's princess kind of a vibe. And so I had idolized my father so much that I would constantly say to people, to myself, to God, that I wanted a husband like my father. And yet something had just happened, and this something revealed to me that might actually not ring true for me, that might not actually be aligned. And so in that moment, I realized, oh, I just wished for that to not happen. And yet that's exactly what I've been hoping for. And then I got even further with that. And I thought, and that's exactly what I've been getting to the T. I have been manifesting men who are just like my father, so much so that my dad is a Pisces, and I kept saying, "Oh, I want a Pisces man. I want to date a Pisces man." And that's exactly what I had. Like the last man that I was like seriously involved with, like mentally, emotionally, was a Pisces. And so the universe, God, spirit was responding to me in exactly the way that I was asking, right? It wasn't off, it wasn't misaligned. I was getting exactly what I'd asked for. But in that moment, I stopped and I thought, maybe what I've been wishing for is not what I actually want. And so that was a few years ago. And I think from there on, it prompted a lot of discovery and curiosity around what I actually want, and perhaps like maybe why I always wanted to have a man like my father, and then why at this stage I decided I didn't want that anymore. So I think what's been going on, and the reason that I think so many of us end up dating men like our fathers, is because that is the blueprint for the relationship that we have with men, right? Our relationship with our father, he's the first man in our lives. He's the first reflection of masculine energy in our lives. And so I think that relationship really sets the tone for, yes, how we engage with everybody, but it really sets the tone for how we engage with men, particularly. And it can set the tone for our romantic relationships. And so my dad, like many, many, like dozens and dozens, thousands and thousands of immigrant they see men, is emotionally unavailable. He's been through a lot. He had a rough childhood. He is a, product of parents who went through partition. He was from Punjab, and so he's a Sikh, and he also went through the 1984 genocide. And then he eventually immigrated to Canada with no knowledge of where he was going and what was going to happen. And so my dad's been through a lot, right? And so it's no surprise that he's emotionally unavailable. He has no idea what his feelings are. He doesn't know how to communicate his feelings. And he is a provider. He focuses on making money for his family, putting up a nice big house, buying his children the cars that he thinks they want. And that's kind of his MO, right? Like that's all he really knows. And so my father, even though he's a lovely human being, his checklist for the needs that he thinks he needs to provide as a man, as a father, as a husband, are vastly different than the checklist of needs that I have as a young woman growing up in this Western context who, needs different things, who wants an emotionally available father, who wants and has needed a father who can be there for her, can listen to her, and actually guide her. And I think so much of my growing up in the last little bit has been coming to terms with and realizing that I have a different father than the one that I have imagined, the one that I have convinced myself and the world of. I think I did that because when I was younger, so I was very close with my dad. My dad was the first primary caregiver. My mom used to work, and then my dad used to take care of me. And I slept on his stomach for an entire year as a baby. And eventually, my dad started to drive a truck because he had to provide for his family, and that was kind of the best option. And so, when I was about 4, I still haven't asked my family this because I'm not ready to open this box up with them yet. But I think when I was around 4, he left and he would drive long haul, and so he would be away for a week, 2 weeks at a time. And I was distraught, like, I was so upset because he was my world, he was my anchor. I'm getting quite emotional as I'm recording this as well, because I loved him so much, and I loved spending time with him. And at that time, as a kid, what I did was I internalized this distance that I was experiencing between me and my dad. I was convinced that I had done something to drive him away, to push him away. And I was convinced that there must have been something wrong with me for him to not spend time with me anymore. Convinced myself that there was something wrong with me because he wasn't around anymore. And I find that at that time, because I was 4, I was doing anything and everything to get his attention. I would wait around for him to call because I wanted to hear his voice. I would wait around to wait for his call because I wanted to just like talk to him and just try and get back to that like emotional closeness that I had with him when I was a kid. And I obviously didn't receive that because not because he didn't want to offer it, but I think he just was in a position in his life where he couldn't offer that, right? Like he had to provide. They had only been in Canada for a few years at the time. My dad was taking care of both his parents, his child, his wife, himself, his house. And so I think, the emotional closeness that I had with my father was replaced by his responsibilities to provide. And I just realized recently that that dynamic with my father is what I've been recreating over and over again in most of my relationships. I would say I do this with my friends. I do this with people who are mentors, and I do this with everybody. I do this mostly in romantic relationships where I'm anticipating them leaving me. I'm anticipating them abandoning me. I'm anticipating a loss of emotional closeness, emotional intimacy. And I 100% of the time internalize it and think, I must have done something. There must have been something wrong with me. And so this has actually really created an anxious attachment style for me. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the attachment styles. If you're not, I highly recommend that you read the book Attached. The name of the authors is escaping me, but it's quite a popular book. And if you just Google it, it'll come up. But I read that book and I realized I have an anxious attachment style. And it really does come from the foundation of it comes from my relationship with my father and sort of that hiccup in our relationship that we had when I was a kid. And so I'm constantly anticipating in anxious ways that my loved ones are going to go away from me, that they're not going to be around with me anymore. And I believe so deeply that there's a flaw within me, that I'm imperfect. And so what I do is and this is very characteristic of somebody who has an anxious attachment style, at any sign of any sort of threat to emotional safety and connection in a relationship, you start to panic, you start to get anxious, you start to overthink, you become consumed with the fear that you're going to lose somebody, and you do something what the researchers call as activating strategies. So you try to establish closeness and you try to establish connection, and quite often it happens in very inauthentic ways because you're coming from a place of anxiousness, right? You're not coming from a place of love. You're not coming from a centered place. And really, the only thing that can counter that is being with somebody, being with a partner, or being in relationship with people who see beyond the anxiousness, see beyond the fear, see you for who you really are, and can understand that you're actually just replicating old patterns. But then further to that is also being really authentic with your needs and being authentic about what is actually showing up for you and what you want. So I want to go back a little bit and say that I was talking to my therapist and I was saying I find that I'm really awkward and uncomfortable around men that are, in a higher position than me. Are, let's say they're my boss, or they're somebody that I'm having a meeting with, somebody that I admire and look up to. I said I'm really uncomfortable around some of those men, and I can't figure out why. It's not that I think that they are going to harm me, but there's some sort of like anticipatory feeling that I constantly have. And what I was able to realize was that I actually make myself like a small, silly little girl when I'm around men that intimidate me, or men that I'm a little bit like, there's like a little bit of a power dynamic there. And I said, I don't know why. I'm a woman, I'm a leader. I'm confident, I'm secure. And yet when a man that slightly intimidates me comes around, I find myself acting like a silly little girl. And oh my God, learning the roots of that was so eye-opening for me. Basically, 4 was the last time that I received love and attention consistently from my father, right? And so a part of what I do as an adult is I revert back to that 4-year-old because I think that That was the last time that I received love, care, and attention, like those habits, the way that I acted, who I was at 4. And so I think unconsciously I go back to that 4-year-old version of Harpo to try and establish connection and attention. And so this has looked very different for me over the years. Anytime that I was interested in a boy, I would like post things on Instagram to grab his attention. Have you guys seen those TikToks and those memes where it's like, posting a selfie for your crush to see and he didn't even like it? Like that kind of stuff, like constantly doing things to like grab the attention of the man that I was interested in or the man that I was dating, and doing things that were really like deeply inauthentic. So like and for me, a lot of it showed up like socially on social media, but then also just in person too, like trying to convince so deeply that I was like worth it, like that, you should like me, you should want to spend time with me, like look at me, like I'm hot, I'm sexy, I'm cool. And yet, all of that was not reflective of who I actually am. I was stepping out of my authenticity and trying, like really trying to be somebody that could be lovable because I felt that I was deeply unlovable, right? That if I was to show my real self, I would just push this person away again, like I pushed away my dad. And so I think what I am trying to unlearn and trying to do right now is understanding that, creating my dad as the version that he was in my head was actually quite unhealthy. It was what I needed to get through as a child. It was what helped me feel safe. It was what helped me feel loved for and cared for. But as an adult woman, it's actually not serving me. To pretend that my dad is perfect and that to pretend that my dad is the best dad in the world is actually not true. It's not real. There are many things about him and our relationship that need to be corrected, need to be unlearned. Many of them are, like rooted in the needs that I have. And the truth is that, yes, he was an amazing father, but he's been more of a provider than he has been a father, and that's actually not his fault, right? Like it's a conditioning of that role. It's due to systemic racism and institutional racism in the communities that we actually end up living in, because many of our dads do not qualify for higher paying jobs, right? Many of them end up doing labor, and many of them are away from the home for a long time, and they're in survival mode because they're immigrants in a different country. And even though, like, I don't know about y'all, but my dad's been in Canada for 30 years, but he still hustles and grinds with the same mentality that he had when he first arrived. And I just constantly say, like, you're in your like late 50s now, you're approaching retirement, your kids are grown, you don't have to live this way anymore. You can choose to live differently. And he just doesn't, right? And so very honestly, I would say that the last little bit has been quite challenging for me as a woman, as a 27-year-old woman who has transitioned out of girlhood and into womanhood. It's been quite challenging. My relationship with my father has really been testing me. And I mean, of course, there's still love that's anchored into it. And I really, really love him, and he really, really loves me. But it's been very challenging, and I find myself feeling really resentful, feeling really angry, feeling really disrespectful and rude, um, and, seeing distance in our relationship. And I think it's just opening up and waking up to the fact that, the image that I have of him in my head is actually not real, and that he perhaps hasn't been able to show up for me in the way that I really needed him to. And how that's impacted my relationship with a lot of the men that I've dated. Most of the men that I've dated have been emotionally unavailable. They did not communicate. They sort of led me on, strung me along, um, didn't show up, right? And really triggered me into my anxious attachment style. And there were avoidance. That's also an attachment style where you want to establish intimacy and closeness, but you don't know how. So you avoid the partner, you avoid the relationship, you avoid anything that signals towards closeness and intimacy. And so I have found myself really dating men who are like my father, who can't really be there for me in the way that I need them to. But because it's better than nothing, I kind of just take it. I kind of just lean in, and I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. At least I'm getting something. Something is better than nothing. And so in all of this, I think what I've been able to uncover is acceptance is very important. Accepting that the reality is different than what you thought it was. I mean, you got to get out of your mind and get out of the perceptions. Because here's the thing about perceptions. When we tell ourselves that our dads are perfect and they're great and we love them and they're our heroes and that, our dads are like, for me, I don't know, the all like realizing that my dad was actually not like a feminist, like, supporter, but actually just like an absent father was like a big deal for me because I was like, "Oh, my dad's just so cool. Like he just like lets me do whatever I want." And I was like, "Actually, Harpo, your dad doesn't let you do whatever you want. Your dad is just so busy that he actually has no idea what's going on." And I'm like laughing nervously because I was like, "Whoa!" Like that's not to say my dad isn't. He's not progressive. He is, but it's just like he's busy. You know what I mean? He's so busy that he's just like, yeah, do whatever you want. And so I would say like the perceptions that we create about anybody, about our parents, for me at least, what it did was like it created a false reality for everything. Like I was like, okay, if, like I'm creating this like perception in my mind, this illusion in my mind of this person who is actually not perfect, but I'm saying that they're perfect. Then when I was dating men who, or I should say boys, when I was dating boys who were not like what I needed, I convinced myself in my mind that they were because I was so used to creating perceptions, right? Like I was so used to just like glossing over things and just like leading with this like fake illusion of what was actually real. But anyway, here's what I'm anchoring into at the moment. Acceptance. Acceptance is like my antidote to all of this because what I'm doing is I'm learning to accept that my father actually wasn't, isn't, and probably can't be who I need him to be. He is who he is. He has been who he has been. And I don't think that there is a lot of hope for change there, not in a negative way, but just like he's in his late 50s. I don't think he's going to change. So accepting what actually is, and then accepting that in him, but then also acceptance of myself. For a long time, I shamed myself for having needs. I shamed myself for needing what I needed from my father. And really, how that came about into existence for me was I was like, I'm like a strong, independent, like baddie, and all these kinds of things. And yet, I so desperately just want to be with a man. Like, I just want to be in a relationship. I just want to be in love. I just want to be my husband, have children, white picket fence. I want all that. And yet I would shame myself for it, right? I'd be like, Harpo, how dare you want that? Like, you're supposed to be strong and independent. You're supposed to figure this out on your own. How dare you want that? Accepting that I do want partnership, right, was number one, to stop shaming myself, to let go of the shame, of the need, of the desire that I have. And then further to that, one layer deeper, accepting that what I needed was valid from my father, that I needed emotional safety and security and openness. I needed his presence. I needed to be able to relate to him. I needed him to be both physically and emotionally present. So accepting that it's okay that I needed those things as a child, and then accepting that I didn't get that, and accepting that who I am is a byproduct of the fact that I didn't get that, and then accepting that yeah, he might not ever change and that I can't go back to the past. And accepting that the only thing that I can change is myself. Accepting that the only thing that I can do is pave the path for something brand new to come in. When I was reading Attached, something really stood out to me. They say that as an anxious attachment style, what you really need to do is to date somebody who is secure. You need to call in a partner who is secure. And that's kind of where they leave the book, right? They're like, yeah, you need to start dating secure people because as an anxious person, if you're dating somebody who is emotionally unavailable, if you're dating somebody who's like not around, they're avoidant, you will just constantly be reinforced in this like cycle of I'm not getting what I need. So you need to date a secure person, someone, again, who can see past the anxiousness and see you for who you are. But what I think that they don't extend into in the book is that in order to attract a secure person, to attract more security into your life and to have secure friendships and work relationships and partnerships, I think some of you know where I'm going with this. To mirror all of that, you have to be secure. You have to make yourself a secure person. You have to work towards security within yourself. And that's when your entire life will start to reflect secure and security back to you. And so, really, what we have to do is we have to be authentic. We have to be authentically ourselves. And authenticity means being authentic about what your needs are, what your wants are, who you are, how you show up, being authentically accepting, being being authentically accepting of where you have shortcomings, where you are strong. Like, it's authenticity, right? When you are authentically yourself, you start to bring in more authentic relationships, more authentic people into your life. And so I think what we have to do is we have to get very honest and open and clear about how we are participating, how we are adding to the challenges in our life. Because here's the thing for me, and I think this might be a nice little loop on this episode. A lot of the things that I told myself about myself and my relationship with my father, they really did serve me when I was younger. I think it's how I was actually able to make sense of myself, the world. That was my protection mechanism. It's how I survived, right? It's how I was able to avoid feeling like soul crushing pain when my dad wasn't around anymore. But those were mechanisms that served me as a child. They don't serve me as a woman anymore, as an adult. It just doesn't serve me anymore. It doesn't serve me to revert back to being a silly little girl. It doesn't serve me to be with people who are not emotionally open and available. And it doesn't serve me to get only a fraction of what I actually really want and deserve and need, right? Because for me to be a healthy, happy, open human being, I need someone to I need to be able to offer that to someone, and I need to be able to receive that from somebody. So I think what we have to really do, girlies, cutie girls, we have to get really, really open about our own complicity in some of the things in our lives that aren't what we want, right? Like, for me, it was to stop wishing for a man that was just like my father. And I got to tell you, trying to date somebody who is emotionally open and available and secure and does actually want to establish and seeks emotional intimacy is hard. Like, it's challenging because it requires you to step out of everything that you actually know, and it requires you to unlearn and to show up differently. And so when we when the thing that we want actually shows up, it requires a lot of commitment, a lot of discipline, openness, and love to keep up with, to foster, to bring into creation. It takes a lot. And you can't do that if you're being inauthentic. First of all, it won't even show up for you if you're not being authentic. But it takes a lot to actually hold it and to be a part of it. So here's what I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to break it down for you in very simple ways. I'm working on acceptance. I'm working on authenticity. I'm working on really, really loving myself. And that's it, right? People always say, like, it'll show up when you least expect it. It might not. It might not show up. But how great is it that you showed up for yourself?